I was remembering that I've been coming to New York since I was 12 years old, and I remember it's a very different city from this one. I have seen the city change in a number of spectacular ways. It has become a rather feverish place.
Hi. We ran out of those invitations. Somebody's getting them from the 32nd floor.
But I mean, if it's just a 32nd floor, it's not going to take them an hour to get it.
This is your your forms. You'll find inside there your badge and also the invitation to all the receptions.
Yes.
And this is your per diem.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
And have a good time at the college.
I will indeed. I've just checked in at the 1986 PEN conference in New York. And this is the first day of the arrival of the various guests and delegates. And I'm full of curiosity to see how it will work out, because it's extremely unusual for authors to meet in such very large numbers to discuss things which are of concern to the literary world.
They haven't achieved anything like to get the writers out of, say, occupied Russia, Afghanistan, and places where the people actually need the help, the freedom of the press. We're about the only country in the world that has the freedom of the press. Canada is ruled by Great Britain. Britain has their own, the Queen. Nothing goes in the paper without the Queen somehow being mentioned, the Prince. The same thing happened in Iran when the Shah was in power. If his picture was not on the paper, the newspaper was closed. The same thing in Greece with the Prime Minister. We're about the only country in the world, and through our love for the arts and everything else, I think it would be great if the pen would do something kind of creative.
World Cup Soccer. CBC Television's daily coverage continues. Tonight, Spain against Algeria. Tomorrow afternoon, West Germany beats Denmark. World Cup Soccer, right here.
I just have to leave.
Has it got anything to do with those two guys that Brett saw?
The dealers are out to get their revenge.
Nobody plays me for a sucker smart guy. Hey!
And they're threatening the safety of Scott's newfound family.
Fire!
Brothers by Choice, Monday night on CBC Television.
There are many ways to see your world, but one source views it from a different angle. One program answers the questions of the moment, reaches the people of the hour, probes beyond the headlines to what really matters. At the end of the day, when you want to know what's happening to your world, one program brings it into focus. There is only one journal.
The nomination comes from Stefan Hermlin, Vice President of International PEN, from the Democratic Republic of Germany, who nominated Norman Mailer, President of American PEN. Yes. I see that Norman Mailer is elected by acclamation.
Can you hear me from here? You will have the opportunity in about a minute to hear Secretary of State Schultz speak to this Congress. As is a small secret by now, there's been a division d'opiniones about the invitation that was fostered to him by me, and some of the PEM members asked me to deliver a letter signed by them to him. This was done, and Secretary Schultz and I then talked for a little while, and it's possible that some of his views may surprise you.
Thank you, President Mailer, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I can only regard Norman Mailer's invitation to me as another shining example of that charitable spirit for which New York literary circles have long been famous.
PEN was founded in 1921 by John Galsworthy to be a political and social conscience of the literary world, to be, as he himself expressed it, a literary league of nations. But unfortunately, this concept pushes people with political concern to the fore, and they may not be the best or even the most representative literary artists.
That more than any in this century is committed in philosophy and in fact to reducing the intrusion of government into the lives, minds, and livelihood of the individual. I am optimistic about the future. As the world gets smaller, the importance of freedom only increases. The yearning for freedom is the most powerful political force all across the planet. You are among its champions. You can be proud of what you have done for that cause. And don't be so surprised by the fact that Ronald Reagan and I are on your side. Thank you.
There's an extraordinary air of discontent here tonight, and I want to talk about it. I think most of you will agree that my feeling about my freedom to write has been paramount in my concerns for as many years as I've been an author. And I expect my government to give me the right to say whatever I please to the best of my ability. And I don't care how left, center, or right my government is, I demand that right of them. And I would put it back to you that there is a kind of puritanical leftism that is more interested in keeping the house clean than in having anything happen within the house. And I say to you that it is equally important to protect the rights of everyone who speaks, including people with whose ideas we may disagree profoundly. If Secretary Schultz was willing to accept the invitation, then I was delighted. It meant the government of the United States, no matter how far right, was willing to recognize the importance of authors. And I am prepared to apologize to him personally for the silly bad manners that we've exhibited tonight. I didn't invite Secretary Schultz here to get insulted or to be pussy whipped.
I would like to add just one word here. My role this evening is the marginal one of the host for the evening rather than the active participant. But on the invitation of Secretary Schultz, I must say that I share full responsibility with Norman Mailer. We talked about it, and how the decision emerged, I don't know, but it certainly came from both of us, and it certainly came from the suggestion came initially as much from me as it did from Norman Mailer.
I was requested to hand the letter to Secretary Schultz. That's all I was requested to do. I didn't hear. You couldn't hear me, and I couldn't hear you. You'll have to trust my good faith. I will tell you that if I've been asked to do it, I don't know that I would have done it because I wouldn't do it any more than I would do it to someone who was my friend.
And now, it's better now? Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is how we are going to proceed. Each speaker will make an introductory statement for 5 or 6 minutes. Then it will be an open discussion among us in which everyone will have the opportunity to comment, to agree or disagree with what the other participants have said. I'm going to give you the names of the participants. Monsieur Claude Simon from France, Mr. William Gaddis from the United States, Mr. Juan Men from the People's Republic of China, Mario Vargas Llosa from Peru, Nadine Gordimer from South Africa, Günter Grass from the Federal Republic of Germany, and Mr. Kobo Abe from Japan. Günter Grass.
I didn't feel comfortable traveling from Europe to New York, and the first thing I get is a lecture about freedom and literature. That was not the reason to come here. I'm still shocked by these things, and what is more shocking for me, that there was, before Mr. Schultz did give us this kind of lectures, there was a protest against, but this protest was cancelled. It wasn't possible to speak out, and we are writers, and we know what it means if we are no more able to speak out our protest. And this happens not in Poland, not in Bulgaria, not in Cuba. It happens here in New York. And I think this is a confrontation of our limited imagination and the strong imagination of the state. This happened yesterday to us. Thank you.
Norman Mailer.
I think it's incumbent on me to address this last question, because obviously I was the person who did not admit the request from the floor yesterday at the meeting. That I had no idea, I literally could not hear what was being said from the back of the room. I do resent the notion that I am trying to suppress thought. I haven't worked for a year and a half bringing people here of every possible intellectual persuasion. We do have a terrible problem, which is, what is the imagination of the state? Does it have it? If there is no possibility of the state ever beginning to embody some kind of creative imagination that comes up to it from the people of that nation, that particular country, then we're all doomed to an endless purgatory until we finally blow it all up. So it's my hope that this question will be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question, please.
Yes.
I'm a member of American PEN, and my name is Gay Talese, and my questions are for Günter Grass. If the state is the enemy, is it not the role of the writer and of this Congress to know the enemy? And if we as writers wish to hear, should we refuse the words of the enemy in the form of our Secretary of State? Third question, in a place such as the library, where we have controversial literature going back to the Dark Ages and many copies of Mein Kampf, would you, if the Congress were in the 1920s in Germany or the 1930s, wished to hear the enemy if his name was Hitler, would you invite him to that Congress?
It's very strange for me to take together in this question Mr. Schulz and Mr. Hitler. I never would do this. Never would do this. I think it would be very normal and useful if every morning and afternoon in our panel would be one or two persons with political practice, with knowledge. I don't feel well coming here and be confronted to listen to somebody I can ask questions afterwards.
Protesting in advance against listening. You were protesting in it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I just speak about my impression. And I thought I'm coming here to an international PAN meeting. And the beginning was shocking for me, and now we go on. I was admiring Norman Mailer and the American authors because they are in a situation you don't find in other countries or confronted to other states. The state in the United States don't help the writers. They have to do by their own. They have to collect money. Why at the end they invite a state secretary to speak? I don't see I still don't see the reason. There's less reason to invite somebody like Mr. Schulz or another one to have the opening speech.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm sorry, but I have to put an end to the session. As you know, there is going to be another session this afternoon. Well, I thank you very much, all the participants and all the audience also for its participation. Thank you.
This morning's session powerfully showed up the fact that the writer is almost by definition an introvert. The politician must be, if he is to be successful, an extrovert. The two do not meet on a common ground where discussion of something like the imagination of the state is possible, and I think we proved it this morning.
Giordano Bruno was a philosopher and scientist of the 16th century. He believed that the universe was infinite, that the stars were suns like our own, that they were circled by planets, and that these planets bore life. His views anticipated those of many modern scientists. However, these ideas were in conflict with the official doctrines of church and state. The suppression of ideas has frequently stalled human progress. Yet attacks on freedom of expression are common in every century and in every country. In Canada, Section 2 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression. Know your rights.
He's a marine lawyer, equally at home in the courtroom or on the deck of a tossing ship. Meet Don Carr of Halifax, Tuesday on Zosky and Company. Tuesday, the world we live in, the future we face.
Today there are 4 billion of us, and soon, in the year 2000, we will be 6 billion.
The world has become a single, interconnected unit.
The World Challenge, with Peter Ustinov and Patrick Watson, begins Tuesday.
Country stars will shine on Country West with your host, Deborah Loran.
Why not tonight? Why not tonight?
Special guests, Bim, Prairie Oyster,
You don't drink.
and Anita Paris. Country West, Friday.
The richest, most powerful woman in Australia, threatened by a secret from her past. Return to Eden, a saga of power, love, betrayal, and revenge. Friday.
It's pleasant to get into the park and to get away from the writers' conference because it gives you a chance to think about writing. And I don't think you get much opportunity to think about writing the Writers' Conference. I have never been at an association of writers before, and this is enormous. There must be 600 people present. A very great many of the people here have a protest of some sort, and it is interesting for a while, but it becomes extremely wearing. I've been a writer all my life, and I can say that with complete sincerity, because I did my first piece of professional writing when I was 11 years old. It happened in relation to the newspaper that my father was publishing at the time. It was a very, very busy night, and everybody connected with the paper was doing something that was important. And there was one quite tiny assignment that there was nobody to cover. It was a lecture at the Methodist Church given by the parson on a visit to Shakespeare's birthplace. And so my father said to me, you go and you write 2 paragraphs about it. So I did, and I wrote 2 paragraphs about it, and my father made some minor editorial corrections and published it, and he paid me 25 cents. And in those days, for a boy of 11, 25 cents was a very respectable sum. And I thought, this writing is a great thing. There's big money in it. The question that is always present in the writer's mind, the inescapable question, is not precisely what am I going to say, but who am I saying it to? And this is a very difficult question. It's all very well to say, well, you're writing for people of like mind who will share your feelings and opinions, but you don't know who they are, you never see them, you very rarely encounter more than a very few readers out of the large group who read your work. And consequently, when you settle down to write, you have a sense of being alone, which is sometimes extremely, it's possessing. I wouldn't say that it was depressing. It isn't really depressing, but it overcomes you in a special kind of way, which is absorbing, and I don't know of any other experience which is quite like it. And you have to work your way through that and write as well as you can, primarily to please yourself. Because if you don't please yourself, you're absolutely certain that you won't please anybody else.
John Updike of the United States.
Thank you. How does the state imagine? Our title challenges the literary man's traditional duty to be concrete and real. Like almost everybody in the world, I was born into a tribe with its rights and obligations and mystic signs. I was early introduced to the flag called the Stars and Stripes, and to the eagle with his claws full of arrows, and the symbols for dollars and cents, and the map showing our westward expansion. The place where my personal hopes and dreams and the intentions and provisions of the state intersected most vitally was the postal system. Its workers, whom in my small town I knew all by name, brought to the house the printed journals, the newspapers and magazines that represented to me a world where I wished to locate my future. In those days when a postage stamp cost 3 cents, I sent letters to great and distant men, cartoonists and writers, some of whom deigned, to my eternal gratitude, to respond. I never see a blue mailbox without a spark of warmth and wonder and gratitude that this intricate and extensive service is maintained for my benefit. It seems to me the writer's imagination and the imagination of the state have opposite tendencies and should keep a respectful distance from one another. Myself, I ask mainly that my tribal officials keep the mails operating, no small task, and one where many tribes fail, and continue to safeguard the freedom of expression that my particular state's founders rashly promised its citizens. This is plenty, and this is enough.
Still, I was struck by the fact that in John Updike's description, the United States emerged as a rather small country. I almost felt that it was the United States were a sort of pastoral, and much as I share his delight in fire brigades and post offices, it was impossible to deduce from what he said that actually the United States was superpower on whose discretion really the continuation of life on the planet would depend.
Our next speaker will be Amos Oz of Israel.
Ladies and gentlemen, friends, the state has no imagination. The imagination of the state exists only in the imagination of some writers, like those who invented our title here. I reject the image of a saintly lot of writers marching fearlessly to combat heartless bureaucracies on behalf of all the sweet and simple human beings out there. Friends, let us not ascribe a demonic imagination to the state and a redeeming imagination to ourselves. It is all in our heads. Let us not give in to the temptation of simplification. We ought to be telling bad from worse from worst. Thank you.
Next question.
I wonder if I could, with the permission of the panel, go forward and speak from there. It's a little more comfortable.
Please do come up. Why don't you sit between Mr. Updike and me?
I've always wanted to find myself in such a position. I don't know what Amos Oz was talking about. He got a lot of applause, so he certainly knew what he was talking about. I know you all were agreeing with him, but I don't know anywhere in the rubric where we said that the state is uniformly evil and we as writers are uniformly good. I mean, I may be silly and childish, but I'm not that far gone.
If a similar conference would have taken place in my native Israel, it would probably be greeted not by the Secretary of State, but by the Prime Minister, not in his capacity as a Prime Minister, but probably in his capacity as a minor, very minor poet. He would be screaming at the audience, the writers and the poets, and they would be screaming at him. They would be interrupting his speech, he would be interrupting theirs. Now this looks to me as a healthy, possible agenda for a relationship. Bad manners, in favor of bad manners.
If there is such an entity as the imagination of the state, is it in the process of disappearing? And if so, what are the consequences for us? Thank you.
Evening, you can check your coat downstairs.
I'm from Korea. Nice to say hello.
Well,
Pleasure.
long way.
How are you? Nice to see you. Nice to say hello. Pleasure. Pleasure.
Your reading was wonderful.
Thank
People
you.
said he reads like an actor. I was down the no. I said he is an actor.
Well, that's how I used to get my poor living.
Well, this dress is made from bags from all sorts of bookstores in New York City. And I make commemorative dresses for special occasions, and this is made specially for today.
We just did our big ball.
Well, the Canadians can have all the guests of honor they want because they're paying for their own transportation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Come on, that's something. I am interested in a property that is about a man called William Walker.
What I would like to say first is that Norman Mailer was at his best. My reference, Norman,
You're getting me into a lot of trouble.
No. Was at his absolute best because I thought to myself, I, having been on occasion been invited to groups that were not necessarily of the same political persuasion, and being on occasion, rarely, but on occasion, unfairly or treated in a hostile way, when I left, I thought less of that group, particularly if it was an intelligent group. And this, of course, is the most intelligent group in the world. The Secretary of State Schultz is terrific. Don't agree with everything he says, but he's absolutely terrific. Honest, intellectual, and a superb. You see, that's what I'm talking about.
Did you know that Radio Canada International is the voice of Canada abroad? And did you know that traveling Canadians listen to Radio Canada International on shortwave to keep in touch? We bring Canada to the world.
Ici Radio-Canada International.
Canada Radio.
Canada Internacional transmite
This
para o
is
Brasil.
Radio Canada International.
CBC News Sunday Report. The news at 10 from Canada and around the world. Peter Mansbridge digs into the major stories by talking with important newsmakers. There's a look at events coming up in the week ahead. And insight into the issues with David Halton, the CBC's chief political correspondent, and Jeffrey Simpson of the Globe and Mail. Sunday night, 10 o'clock. All the news and more. CBC News Sunday Report.
Doc Roberts.
Oh, this is easy.
A man of many talents. A talent for danger. And a talent for raising a family. Danger Bay, Monday nights.
There's a Jane Fonda, no.
Sometimes there's laughter.
Victoria Principal, no.
Sometimes there are tears.
It's...
They're solving problems and having fun at the Youth Center.
You did everything you could. Probably want me to break the news about Santa Claus while I'm at it. What happened to Santa?
Join the counselors on Hang It In Monday.
Well, is a Canadian a fitting person to speak in such company? Is not Canada a rich and pacific country, all too obviously at ease in Zion? Has not Canada recently been scolded in the British press for its overwhelming dullness? A dullness asserted to exceed even that of Switzerland. I apologize to any Swiss who are present. The statement is not mine. And is not dullness the badge of stodgy bourgeois respectability and intellectual stasis? What can Canada have to say to you whose wounds are fresh and bleeding? Well, quite a lot, really, because we have our wounds too, though now they are mostly scars. But once we bled, and copiously. And by whom were the wounds inflicted? Now, here I hesitate, because if there is one thing a Canadian hates, it is to be a bad guest. Incidentally, I am saddened by the lack of saving Rabelaisian humor in what I have heard until now in this conference. I adjure you, forget about politics and politicians as far as you can. My word to you is back to your ivory towers. If from time to time you wish to hurl a spitball from the ivory tower at a politician, do so, but do not regard that as your principal task. I remember the words of a Canadian artist, Glenn Gould: "Solitude nourishes creativity. Collegial fraternity tends to dissipate it." A week of collegial fraternity every few years is quite enough. So on Saturday, back to your ivory towers.
You seem to be getting awful.
And you and I have met, but you wouldn't remember it, but I remember.
I remember. We were on a panel many years ago.
A long time ago.
There were four of us. Who were the other two? Or just we were just only remember the two important ones?
We were the only significant ones.
Well, I was trying to reach some kind of a generalization to know who was alienated from the state and who wasn't. And it appeared that those who are in part of revolutionary governments identify with with the state. Those, mainly the democracies,
I know.
sort of
well, we don't have to be
self-imposed alienation.
Yes, they like to be alienated, but what gets me down is the Me Too gang in the States who want to express their sympathy for the people who are oppressed by saying that they too are oppressed, and they're not oppressed. We've just been talking about you. Well, not quite, but we were talking about the way this conference is set up.
Yes.
And it seems to me that the flabbiness of the things that we're going to see.
You know, these ladies.
Prenez silence! Thank you. I'm Bob Johnston, Consul General for Canada here. No evening for speeches, just a word of welcome to all of you. It's an enormous honor and a pleasure for us representing Canada here in New York to welcome all of you. And I may say we look forward very much in Canada to the fact that 2 or 3 years from now, 1989, I think it is, the Penn Congress will be in Canada, in Montreal and in Toronto. Stephen.
Well, with the best sense of Pavlovian protocol that the occasion requires, I want also to welcome all of you here. I stand before you clutching Margaret Atwood's new book in my hand, my nationalism firmly in place, and very, very pleased that you're all here, and very pleased as well that some of my colleague ambassadors from the United Nations are here who have numbers of writers in delegations representing their countries at the Penn Congress. May I say something which I was thinking about as I flew back from Toronto this morning and read the Toronto Globe and Mail account of the conference sessions yesterday, part of which dealt with Robertson Davies' wit and elegance in dealing with national identity, part of which, well, I thought I could incite a little heckling. I know. Those appeals, those feelings, those passions, that documentation which the writers at Penn have displayed, that helps us in the UN, where we fight the same fight and need that kind of material and put it to use.
You sit over here. There? And this place for me?
I do it during the middle of the night.
Our first speaker today is a distinguished statesman, leader of his country for many years. It gives me particular pleasure today to present you Pierre Trudeau.
Monsieur le Président, chers amis, quand j'ai accepté l'invitation de participer à ce groupe de discussion, je m'en suis trouvé fort honoré et j'ai immédiatement consulté le feuillet qui accompagnait l'invitation. The more interesting question to be asked of this panel is not, does the state have an imagination, I shall answer that question in the negative. A more relevant question would be, how did members of PEN come to imagine the state as having an imagination? The state is not some anthropomorphic creature with a head and a body, a heart, arms, including the secular one, and legs marching off to war. A creature which would be endowed with a will, a reason, la raison d'etat, sans doute, and an imagination. So I return to my original question. Why would the members of PEN imagine the state to be an objective reality? An organism is the word they use in the blurb that introduces this morning's meeting. The state conceivably can exhibit many of the same attributes as an organism, which survives in difficult times. And why would that organism be separate and apart from those who exercise control over the government? More important still is the question, why would that imagined state possess, and again I'm reading from the blurb, an imagination of its own in conflict all over the world with the imagination of the writer? Why would writers assume that all over the world they wield no power over the state, exercise no control over its government? The only point is that if writers do not want to play that role, they should face the consequences. And nobody expressed those consequences more eloquently than Plato. If I can quote from memory, it goes like this: the price we pay for not being involved in government, that we are governed by people less worthy than ourselves.
At last, the theme is finally brought into focus. And with a degree of cool logic, which has been notably absent from this panel, and not only from this panel, but from the whole conference. And it was remarkable to hear him, refreshing to hear him, and of course one was very proud that he came from Canada.
This press conference has been called to inform you about the activities of the International PEN, and we're here mainly to introduce our latest report and to answer questions.
The wonderful work that PEN has done for imprisoned writers and publishers throughout the world. And individual members of this organization have come to my defense, including Arthur Miller and Norman Mailer. But PEN has not uttered a syllable, not a word. It has written no letters to prison authorities requesting my release. It has done nothing to defend imprisoned American writers and publishers. Why not?
I do not know. This case has not been brought to my attention.
It was known throughout the world, reported in every country I ever heard about that had a free press.
Have you ever sent your documents to PEN?
I did, and individual members know very well about it. Arthur Miller issued an eloquent statement in my behalf, but PEN never did. Never wrote a letter to me in prison. Never wrote to the parole board to get me released. Why do you ignore imprisonment and censorship here in the United States? Are you aware that there is a powerful movement sponsored, directed by the President of the United States to further strengthen the obscenity statutes of this country under which American publishers and writers are imprisoned? It's called the Meese Commission, and it meets here in New York this very next week on the 21st and 22nd. What is PEN doing about that?
I have just been informed that there is a resolution before the PEN Congress today condemning censorship in the United States in all its forms, and that there is another resolution dealing particularly with the consequences of the Walter McCarran Act. I think you will find that Penn has not been derelict in its duty in drawing attention to the derelictions of the American government, that the Freedom to Write Committee of the American Penn Center spends a good half of its time dealing with violations in America. If your case has not been brought up specifically, it is either because they did not receive the proper documentation, or they judged that you were not suffering for your opinions, but for some other reason.
Balderdash.
Any more questions, please?
Have hundreds and hundreds of signatures. I don't know how many because they are being Xeroxed as I speak. We urge both women and men to sign it. Please come and sign it up here if you have not yet done so. We protest the underrepresentation of women on the panels and in the readings. Although nearly half the Penn members attending the conference are women, out of 117 panelists, only 16 are women.
I'd like to ask for everyone to find a seat and not to open the doorways.
You've got to not take it too personally. You have to take it somewhat. I know that. But
who's taking it personally?
Yeah.
Remember that remark you made when someone said, "Juice race, you're going to go to jail." You said, "I think I'll get a good rest."
Yeah.
So if I step down, what's the big
That's
deal?
true. No, you don't. Nobody's asking you to do that anyway.
Well,
I don't want to be
I'll tell
on
you
the
something.
same.
If the meeting is busted up, I am going to step down.
It's not busted up.
No.
We
I mean,
have 20 minutes to talk, and we're going to do that.
Absolutely. Okay.
Okay,
All right.
that's fair.
Good.
All right.
Before we start, in about 5 minutes, the women who are here are going to take the floor for about 20 minutes. And at the end of that time, I will try to respond.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask your permission to stand? I suffer from heightism. Sure you're familiar with that. I am Margaret Atwood. I am president of the Anglophone section of Penn Canada. In concert with the Francophone section, we will be holding the conference in 1989, and I will promise you right now that our conference will not only be bilingual, but also bisexual. Let me make it clear that I have no personal or national axe to grind. My country was represented by 4 guests of honor, 3 of whom were women. The 4th was Robertson Davies, whom I'm sure was selected because he was considered to be equal to any 3 women in beauty and accomplishment. I represent an absence. Quotes, "We need someone to do it who will be equal to the men," I was also told. Which men, I wondered, and how many at once? I don't mind having to be equal to 4 or 5 men, but 117 is a pretty tall order, and I wouldn't have minded having a little help. I hope that at future Penn conferences, things will be so arranged that I will not be asked to make a speech of this kind, whether I'm suitable or not. 16 out of 117 panelists is a mere 14% by my count. That's about as good as the Oxford Book of Welsh Verse, which starts in the 12th century. This is the 20th. Surely we at Penn should recognize that fact. Thank you.
Much has been made of the remark I made yesterday that there are few women who are intellectuals and novelists and poets. Now, I was not trying to say that there are not a great many women who are intellectuals. I mean, I'd be a fool to make that remark. The point is that someone who is an intellectual and an artist is rare. It's a rare phenomenon. It doesn't happen often. I can't think of too many truly talented women in America who would fit into the category of Susan Sontag, who is an intellectual and a literary artist. There are not too many. Now, you can name a few.
Norman, may I speak?
You may have a word. Yes, my dear.
My name is Erica Jong, and I'm a member
I know.
of PEN. And I would like to speak just so that, as usual, a man will not have the last word. I think the issue here is not whether or not women are intellectuals, but the issue here is the issue of invisibility. We have written and written and written, from Sappho to Jane Austen into the present day. My colleagues here, Margaret Atwood, Cynthia MacDonald, distinguished writers all, wonderful writers, intellectual writers. Often they have many college degrees and graduate degrees and are very, very able. And yet we remain on some level invisible. Invisible in your definition of what it means to be an intellectual, and invisible although we are more than half the population. This is our question. Our question to you is, why do you look at us and not see?
I would say that Erica Jong is the last woman in the world who can plead invisibility. If you want to yell, please give one good yell and leave. I'll tell you what, would, we'll wait until those who wish to leave, and then those who are in the rear who wish to hear can come forward. These matters are simple. We don't really have to get upset about them. I'd like to thank you for your courtesy, incidentally.
We are not upset, we are insulted, deeply insulted.
You cut us off for this boring monologue of yours that we don't want to listen to. That we've heard many times full of cliches. But don't you see?
Well, then why not leave?
And don't tell me why I don't leave. And another thing, we asked you seriously.
Madam, if I asked William F. Buckley to get his foot out of my face, I would request of you that you remove your finger from my eye.
I'm sorry, to say one thing, which is that maybe you have a point, women, that you're not stupid, that you're not being frivolous, that maybe you have a point. You haven't had the good manners, which you speak about a lot, or the decency to at least give us that kind of courteous reply. You had no right to cut us off to force us to listen to you.
No, I do have a right to cut you off, and I'll tell you why. One, because I'm the chairman. Now, I can resign this post as chairman very quickly. I can be voted out. I can be voted out as chairman. In fact, why don't we do that right now? Will those in favor of removing me as chairman, please say aye. Aye. Will those in favor of keeping me as chairman, please say aye. Aye. All right. Madam, I'm still the chairman.
I think that if this conference had taken place in Toronto, it would have been very much more orderly, and it might also have been rather cooler and more logical. Now, whether that would be a good thing or not, I do not know. But I certainly feel that that would have represented the Canadian spirit, and that, if I may say so without being a bad guest, there was a sort of diffuseness and looseness of thought and a certain want of firm literacy about the way in which matters were conducted, which was harmful to the discussion generally. And I'm afraid that some of the candidates from Europe and from the rest of the world rather showed up with the local products.
Tee off with Sports Weekend and live coverage of the U.S. Open. We've got third-round action from New York Saturday. Stay with us as CBC Television brings you The National next. World Cup Soccer, CBC Television's daily coverage continues. Tonight, Spain against